Okay, and then after fighting the Great Lich King, they will then travel across the mountains where they will face the Dragon Goddess of Doom. And then after that, they will face the 10 Yetis of Yeti Town, which is way more dangerous than they can imagine. And then after that...
Choo-choo! All aboard, everyone!
What?
Well, it sounds like you're building a railroad, my friend.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm just creating a normal, tabletop role-playing game campaign.
Normal? Maybe for a lame-o.
Okay, what am I supposed to do? Just let them go anywhere they want to go?
Yes, absolutely.
Why would I do that?
Because it's more fun.
Okay, I admit that would be fun, but...
Yeah, it would be fun. Wouldn't it be great to watch them discover the world all on their own?
Let them go where they want. Let them do what they want. That could be a lot of fun. Do you want to be a better dungeon master? Me too. Hi, William Tramp, also known as This FNGM here, and today I want to talk to you about building a sandbox. Sandbox-style campaigns are one of my very favorite styles of tabletop role-playing gaming. Taking a world, filling with wondrous locations, and then letting the players loose into it so that they may be able to forge their own path and discover the world on their own terms is one of the most free and pure ways to play a tabletop role-playing game. Now, while to many, sandbox-style campaigns are obvious in their implementation, I would argue that modern game audiences may not have as much of an opportunity to understand how to put one together for their own home tables. This isn't to say that there isn't ample information out there. There most certainly is. But in a way, there's so much information about this subject that it can feel pretty overwhelming on where to even start. So that's why I made this video, to offer you, the Sandbox Curious Dungeon Master, a few tips that I have learned through extensive research and playtesting at my own table as to how to build the best sandbox you can for your group. But I should state, there are so many tips that I want to share that I've decided to make this video part 1 of 2. Maybe 3. Who knows what the future brings. But either way, today's advice is going to center around the centerpiece of any good sandbox, the map. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Tip number 1, make a map. In my opinion, every good sandbox begins with a map. Having a map is amazing because you get the opportunity to fill it with wonderful toys to play with, and it serves as a guide to tell you, the game master, which toys the players are going to encounter when they begin their explorations into the great wide world. Now, my advice on creating a map is twofold. First, keep it small. Rather than trying to flesh out an entire world all at once, which is definitely some awesome, lonely fun, start off in a small region. My recommendation is no more than a week or 2 away from the starting town. Now remember that the players can always go beyond the map, but it will take time and multiple sessions to get to that point, and there will be plenty of time for you to add more when you need it. Second, I want to highly recommend using hexes. Hexes butt up nicely against one another, and each adjacent hex is equidistant from the current hex, which keeps travel and distance easier to track. Now, some of you might ask, how big should the hexes I make be? Well, there's no one right answer to this question, but my personal preference would be that the hex size should be dependent on your system of choice. Specifically, the size of a hex should be informed by the average travel speeds for a group that your system provides. Now let's say we're using Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. For that, I prefer to use 6-mile hexes. 6 is divisible by all of the travel speeds listed for the game. 18 for slow travel, 24 for normal travel, and 30 for fast travel. So this means in a normal travel day, the players should be able to travel about 4 hexes, assuming the terrain is favorable. Tip number 2, populate the hexes. Populating hexes is the bulk majority of the prep work for a sandbox campaign. Now, while it can be daunting to know how much to place where, I do have a few tips to make the work easier. Now, as a quick note, if you want to limit the amount of hexes that you have to populate, or at least populate with the same challenge rating sort of things, consider placing your starting town on one edge of the map. Rather than having to populate a number of equivalent challenges to fill the full 360 degrees around the town, starting on one edge allows you to use the majority of the map space to build up bigger threats further out from the start, instead of scraping to create a ton of similar ones really close by. Okay, so for populating hexes, I like to take a note from great games such as Holy Mountain Shaker from Exalted Funeral and The Dark of Hot Springs Island from Swordfish Islands. I use a 3 things rule. Each hex will have 3 discoverable locations. Now the first location is obvious, and it's going to be seen whenever the player characters move through that hex. The second location is discoverable only by exploring the hex. Now, while it is somewhat hidden, any amount of effort in the hex to investigate it will grant the PCs access to that location. Now, the final location is hidden. What this effectively means is that the third location is only discoverable by exploring the hex and by succeeding at some sort of test, like a skill roll, or by completing a set of conditions. Now, when using this method, I like to take locations from every source I can. If I have an adventure with a sunken citadel, maybe it's sunless, I toss that into a hex. If I have an anthology series with a number of low-level or similarly leveled adventure locations, well, all of those become fair game for putting in those hexes. Now, not every location that you have needs to be a sprawling dungeon complex. Sometimes the location is just something fantastic or memorable, like the dead fields that was once the site of a great battle, or a spire of blue glass that juts from the ground like a claw reaching towards the sky. Anything. Now, one last thing I want to mention on this is that, in my opinion, empty hexes are the bane of any sandbox. To put out areas for players to explore and then not have any locations of interest within them can kind of feel like a screw job. Now, don't mistake my meaning. I'm not saying that you have to prepare 3 times however many hexes you have in content. In fact, I strongly urge you to leave some of those 3 hex location spaces blank, leaving yourself some room for improvisation. Tip number 3, build up the danger the further you get from civilization. Most towns will likely have ways to deal with threats in the immediate area and choose to settle in relatively safer areas. Sure, there should be some low-level threats in the neighboring hexes to give the player characters something to do on brief excursions from town, but I would make those locations relatively low risk and low reward. I tend to imagine rings around the starting town, each ring serving as about 2 hexes moving away from the starting town. Now the first ring, so the first 1 to 2 hexes away from the town, tends to have locations that are easy to resolve, like one-shot style encounters and locations. Maybe there's a small dungeon or lair, but typically nothing too exciting. Now on the second ring, which is about 3 to 4 hexes from town, I start to bump it up. Threats and the like that take more time and effort, dungeons that may take more than a session to clear, and threats that start forcing the player characters to punch a little above their weight class. But they are still close enough to the starting town to get back in the same day. Now, once you start getting to about the third ring, about 5 or 6 hexes away from town, you start to see gameplay change. Being able to get to the location, explore, and get back to town in the same day will be very difficult for many parties, so the danger really starts to amp up. Players now have to start stocking up on supplies, carrying capacity often becomes more important, and threats become more pronounced. The overall idea is that each ring away from town gets progressively harder. This is intended to correlate in the player's mind that the further from town you go, the more dangerous things get for them. But so too do the rewards get even better. Now, all of that stated, feel free to toss 1 or 2 items that are way above the weight class for the player characters near the town, giving them some goal to work towards back near home. I typically make these types of threats a slumbering giant of sorts. Left alone, the town is perfectly fine, but once the player characters start to push that button, they now put their home in immediate danger. Well, I sure hope they're ready for what lies in that Lich's sealed tomb. Tip number 4. Random tables are your best friend. My creativity, when left to its own devices, has its limits. I want to create amazing and fantastic locations, but I don't always have the brain power to come up with all those insane ideas all on my own. So in these cases, I love using random tables to help kickstart my creative process. In fact, when populating my hexes, I like to leave 1 or 2 slots per hex open to this type of procedurally generated content. This gets me used to using those tools and also helps me flex my own creative muscles. The muscles are in here. Now, a couple of fantastic resources for this would be the Tome of Adventure Design Revised Edition by Mythmere Games, the Game Master's Book of Astonishing Random Tables by Ben Egloff, or the Lazy Dungeon Master's Workbook by Michael Shea, which I do not have a physical copy of, but I do have a PDF. All right, now, all three of these have plenty of random tables for you to use to generate new ideas for your games, even if the results of these tables serve just to get the ball rolling. Now, when you leave certain pieces of generation up to chance, including what lives in the sandbox, what is encountered while traveling, and even using random tables to determine how NPCs and monsters react to the presence of the player characters, this can really go a long way into making the game feel fresh and exciting, not only to your players, but to you. And don't worry if you don't have the confidence to roll randomly at the table to each and everything the PCs can interact with. Having a few pre-rolled encounters that pop up whenever the time calls for it is a great way to practice using the random tables and yet still have the time to think through how the event begins before placing it in front of your players. Now, over time, you may find that you're using the tables more and more and you become more comfortable, and then rolling them at the table may just become second nature, but we'll get to that with time. And that's it for this video. Creating a sandbox can seem daunting, but by creating a map, populating the hexes, making sure to build up the danger for the further from the starting town you go, and familiarizing yourself with random tables, you will be well on your way to having a setting of your very own for your players to dive into. Anyway, I hope I get to see you soon when I release the second part of my Sandbox series, Bringing the Sandbox to Life. Thank you for listening, and have a good one. Wait! It's time for a bonus tip! Remember when I was talking about putting 3 locations in each hex and then circles around the starting town and whatnot? Well, here's a great tip to get your players excited for the sandbox and get some pretty damn near immediate buy-in. Somewhere in the first circle, add an abandoned stronghold. You know, like a castle or a tower in disrepair that's populated by monsters who need clearing out. You know, one that the townsfolk talk about on the regular in hushed whispers right in the PC's earshot. Why? Because it's fun, and it's classic, and it's a stronghold for your players to take over that makes the setting feel more personal. Offering the players a base of operations that they can earn by clearing out the cobwebs and the giant spiders that may inhabit them gives them a great way to spend their hard-earned treasure by fixing it up, a place to relax and conduct downtime activities, and a way to cement their characters in the local area and in the setting. Plus, every now and then, who doesn't want a session in which the player characters get to defend their lair from some threat that they forgot to finish up? I know I do. A wink.